Hi, so welcome to everybody who is watching this recording. Um, I'm Teresa Deskur. I'm joined by several other members of the Early Music America Emerging Professional Leadership Council, or EPLC, as well as our three panelists today, who I will let them introduce themselves in just a second. So the theme of tonight's discussion is early music in higher education, and we have three panelists from various different schools, different states, different countries to talk about their experiences. So, Dana, would you like to begin and tell us a little bit about yourself and your work?
Sure, sure. My name is Dana Marsh. I'm director of the Historical Performance Institute at Indiana University Jacobs School of Music. I'm almost incredulous to think this is my ninth year there, and it's just been a wonderful time. I work both at IU, but I also work a bit in Washington, D.C., as artistic director of the Washington Bach Consort. And I think this is my seventh year and my final year as a board member of Early Music America, and have had some very happy collaborations between EMA and the Bloomington campus. Namely, back in 2018 and 2019, the Young Performers Festival came to Bloomington those years. So it's really, for me, a real labor of love working with this organization. But it will be nice also to step down for just a little bit too. Um, I think I think that our field right now has never been as active as it is now in many respects. When I think back 20 years ago, the number of groups, the number of students emerging out in the field at a very high level has really gone up considerably. I mean, just taking as one isolated example, if you become, say, a really proficient singer, there's a lot of pro choral groups out there that are very good, and you can almost kind of stitch together a good piece of income that way. That wasn't so much the case 25, 30 years ago. And just additionally, I really like the entrepreneurial spirit I'm seeing among students, and I mean that in the best sense of the word. Meaning being able to balance economic realities against what our vision is in terms of what we want to achieve. But I think, at the moment, it's a really, really good time very generally in the field. The challenges, particularly where higher education are, and I'm sure my colleagues will have plenty of input here as well, is while the number of programs have gone up, the number of majors, given the pandemic, in some places have gone down a little bit. There's been a definite dip. I've had a number of discussions with colleagues in various HP schools, and it's a moment when not only classical music has a relatively narrow field, but how much more HP is the case. It can be a real challenge to get someone into, tuitions are high, and you've got to show that, you have to have the feeling that you're going to come out of that with all the debt that's incurred and be able to float. So, I mean, that's kind of a reality that I'm always really impressed with the way students are handling it. I've gone on far too long, so I will hand it over to them.
Karen, would you like to share with us next and speak a little bit about yourself and your work?
Sure. I'm Karen Cook. I'm Associate Professor of Music History at the Hart School, the University of Hartford. And I also am on faculty and staff at the Amherst Early Music Workshop, which I do not only during the summers, but also year round. So in fact, I was hosting some classes this afternoon for a while, which was great. My experiences with early music tend to come in the form of scholarship, primarily, and then secondarily working with amateurs and pre-professionals at Amherst. So I have a wealth of different perspectives coming from that, but I'll wait for more specific questions before I can delve into anything there. So that's me.
Oh, and I forgot to mention this kind of at the outset. We were hoping for each of the panelists to share something they're excited about for the field of early music, and then a challenge that you think that we're facing. I think Dana just kind of integrated that naturally into his intro. So would you like to share a little bit about that now, or we could circle back around and chat later?
Sure. I think something I'm excited about is just seeing some of my students get excited about early music when they had no idea that that would be something they could find interesting. Working at a conservatory, as I do, most of my students, if not all of them, are there for much more modern music, and early music is a bit of a mystery. So finding out those moments when you can maybe pique somebody's interest is really exciting to me. I also do a lot of work in modern media. And so a lot of my early music work stretches into my media studies, and getting the chance to talk about early music from the perspective of technology and film and video games is really exciting to me. So that's something that I'm excited about in general, is just the ways in which my early music work plays out in, fandom studies of things that are totally unrelated, or are they? And then challenges, I may have to ponder that, but I think the biggest challenge I can see is just, financial budgetary concerns in academia, meaning that some of the programs get trimmed back, and early music tends to be a thing that folks don't see as being as relevant. And so it's often on the chopping block. And so finding a way of continuing to integrate and maintain early music programs or early music classes is a challenge, but that's a kind of challenge that's going to play out differently in a lot of different spaces.
Wonderful, thank you. And then Eunice, would you like to go ahead and do the same, share about yourself, and then a little bit about something you're excited about with the field of early music and higher ed, and then a challenge that we're facing?
Hi, well, I'm Eunice Padilla. I'm from Mexico City. I had background as a pianist. That's my bachelor was in piano here in Mexico City. And then I always have been early music lover, so I started learning the harpsichord. So that took me to New England Conservatory. I did a master's on harpsichord performance, and for the piano performance also a master's degree. Which music I really love harpsichord for the piano. Then I came back to Mexico. I'm a full-time harpsichord and chamber music teacher, and I also did like a PhD in music tech. I like doing some apps and things like that. I don't do that much because I'm mostly a performer and a teacher. And since 2021, I became artistic director of the Academy of Ancient Music, Academia de Música Antigua, at the university, but not at the school. It's a different venue sponsored by the university, in which I work with young students or young professionals that want to try a more in-depth work in the early music field. They basically singers. We have a choir and instrumentalist, violin, viola, cello. We have also gamba, recorders, and of course harpsichord. So that's basically what I do. I find the early music field very exciting because it's so fresh. Most of the students learn to play classical. They have a classical tradition formation for many years, and they used to do always the same things the same way. So when they start to play or to learn early music, they find it very interesting because it's something new, and they can express themselves in a very different way. They can improvise, they can learn new things that they didn't know about. So I think that's very good for young musicians to find something different to do and to really learn to love early music and do many things with that. I think that's very exciting. That's what happened to me as well. And the challenge, well, I think there's everything you've said here. It's very true. We have here in Mexico people that sometimes have 1 or 2 master classes, or they have 1 or 2 years experience in the early music field, and then they think they are specialists, or then they know everything about it. And I find it very complicated because learning and doing early music is like a lifelong thing. So many people think that they know everything about music, and they actually, it's complicated. And also the thing is, you have to reinvent yourself here to get things going for yourself as a performer. So that's also a big challenge for us. I think it's in the world, not only here, but I think that's a complicated thing for early musicians.
Thank you. So EPLC prepared a couple of questions, a few specifically for each panelist, although if any of our panelists have thoughts about them, feel more than free to chime in. Just kind of about your specific experiences in early music and higher education. So this first one is for Dana, but again, if Karen or Eunice, if you have thoughts, please feel free to join in. I would love to know about how, because you were speaking to the fact that you've seen the program at IU grow a lot in recent years, and lots more students coming out and going out into the world to work in historical performance than previously. So do you recruit music students from outside of the HP program at IU to participate in early music classes, and how do you do so? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we get a very large number of students coming in from other departments. In fact, at the moment, our number of majors is a bit down, especially in the wake of the pandemic. But we typically, because first off, it's a big school. There are 1,600 music majors here, so you're bound to have a good number of pianists, for example, who really want to learn harpsichord, but especially basso continuo practice, because that's not a keyboard requirement for those taking a keyboard proficiency test on the modern side of the school. So this gives them sort of another outlet. And just, I guess, as a little aside there, our newest faculty, so Joanna Blundolf, who teaches Baroque cello and viola da gamba, she started as a modern cello major at IU, and likewise Ingrid Matthews did. She came here to study with Joseph Gingold when he was one of the major violin teachers, and then our keyboardist as well, Jonathan Audie, he started here as a pianist as well. So there is that moment of conversion, I think, and as Karen was mentioning before, when this light goes on inside a student, and also, as Eunice mentioned, there's a freshness to it, that the unexpected part of it is that, this is otherwise old music, but there is something about it when approached in various ways that makes it seem absolutely fresh and completely relevant to our day-to-day lives. So that's, I would say that when our numbers are sort of where we like them to be, as far as majors go, we always have at least 3 or 4 times more minors. So we may have up to 75 or 80 participants in one way or another in our ensembles, and chamber music program as well, or other classes. So I would say that so-called secondaries or minor area students working in early music are definitely the majority of the students we have here. And it's good because it gives majors a chance to model something and help bring secondaries kind of on board more quickly. And, you know, since they're ultimately going to be teaching as well, it's a good experience, I feel. I hope I answered your question with.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And it's, you know, it's so rare to find a musician that is only doing one thing in this day and age. So it makes, I think, a certain sense that you have people from all areas of the school who are finding this other avenue to participate in music at IU and anywhere else that they're really excited about. And Karen and Eunice, if you have any thoughts about that as well as it pertains to your particular schools, be happy to hear about it.
Would you be kind enough to just clarify the question again so I can make sure?
Sure. Just to talk a little bit about the process of recruiting maybe non-HP majors into early music programs at your schools and kind of how you go about that, if that is a big part of your program, sort of anything related to that idea.
Yeah, that's a very small part of what we do here, a minute part. So it's probably not a question that I can answer with any degree of consistency or accuracy. We do have a collegium. It's largely Baroque oriented and strings heavy. But we've had a small few folks get really interested in early music performance and end up, after they graduate from us, going off to say like the Scala Cantorum or other early music programs, which has always been a pleasure to see. It's a small few, but I try to do a little performance in my classrooms to whet the interest, but we don't have an early music performance program per se.
In Mexico, it's very interesting because at the university, we don't have an early music program per se. We have a bachelor's in harpsichord in recorder. And now we have a brand new option that's viola da gamba. And that's it. We don't have like a big program. But we try to basically seduce the students, you know, the modern instruments, the instrumentalists, because there are really few people that come like naturally, I want to be a harpsichordist or I want to be a Baroque violin player. That doesn't happen too often. So we bring them to class. We have Baroque violin workshops, and we have a Baroque orchestra. It's not, it's like a minor, but then they start to like it and they come to early music. It's not an easy thing. We don't have that many people, but with the orchestra, the Academy of Ancient Music, we get these good students that are really interested, that are good violinists or good cellists, and we got them interested in the early music, and then we bring them to this other program, which is not a school, but they work a lot, and I think we're getting there with many things about it. But I think it's hard to get students here in Mexico. They are for years. Sometimes we had, with the pandemic, we had no students for harpsichord in a year. I mean, we had no options, and there were no applicants. So that's complicated. That's complicated. We have to make lots of things so they can come, seduce them, basically.
This next question is definitely very specifically for Karen, and I was really interested to hear about you speaking a little bit about video game and film music in your introduction. So I'd love to hear about your work on medievalism and video game music in the classroom, and how that's been, you know, a useful tool to kind of bring people into this field and this repertoire.
I mean, sure, I'd be happy to talk about my work, but I don't really do it as a way of getting people into performance or into the repertoire. So if that happens,
whatever you'd like to share about it.
Sure. You know, I can just summarize my work a little bit, which is that I'm really interested in how modern media decides to portray ideas of the past through sound, and whether that's like a historical past or a fantastical past. A lot of times the sonic elements are the same, right? So I'm just very curious about how we make musical or sound-oriented choices? What do modern audiences find believable? And of course, I'm speaking from like a Western context, right? I'm not going to speak to other contexts that I'm not culturally participating in, right? But when we look at how pervasive the medieval is in modern media, the films and television shows, and especially video games, how prominent medieval topics are and plots are, there's so much work that's been done on accuracy and authenticity in, say, whether you have the right sword or the right armor, or if that horse would have been there, or if that plot is believable, or whatever have you. Sonically, that work lags behind just a little bit. There's been some great work that's been done on medieval and medievalist sounds in film and TV shows. Video games is where I come in a lot of the time, and that work is still developing. There's not a whole lot of us, not too many scholars that are working on that. So I'm one of the few that's working on video games specifically. To me, it's a real opportunity to get into some serious studies because of the fact that not only are there so many medieval oriented video games as compared, even, not as compared to film, because I don't have any numbers, right? But there's hundreds and thousands of medieval oriented video games. But those games tend to be way longer than films are, right? So even the shortest games, we're talking like, 4, 5, 6 hours, right? Long games you could be in for hundreds of hours, right? So when you think about how much sound you're going to, take in when you're playing some of that, what does that mean? What's it doing? What kinds of ideas about the medieval past are we portraying in sound, and what are we communicating? Keep saying we like there's a we, there's not a we, but you know what I mean. What ideas of the past are being communicated to the players and the listeners. And one of the things that I try to poke at a little bit is whether all of those sounds are neutral, or whether some of them maybe are a little problematic. Maybe they're feeding into some negative stereotypes, or just some unfortunate stereotypes that people have about the past that aren't necessarily being thought through. Like the idea that the European past was entirely Christian, or entirely white, or entirely violent, or superstitious, or religious, or whatever stereotype you want to have. Maybe the sounds are feeding into that as well. I definitely think that it's a useful tool to get, say, especially my undergrads, interested in the idea that early music is something that they might already be familiar with. Most people were like, oh, I don't listen to that stuff. And then I'll say, well, but here's Skyrim, or here's World of Warcraft, or here's Lord of the Rings, or here's whatever, Halo. And they're like, oh yeah, I love that. And I'm saying, we have to have a moment here in which we talk about the music that stuff is drawing on, and the kinds of musical and sonic elements that are kind of being repeated and broadened, and even, plain old early music and compositions that show up in games that people don't realize that's a legit medieval composition. I really like that. I have that on do people use iPods anymore? Right. My phone, I have it in my playlist. So that's a little bit about what I'm doing there.
Thank you. That's fascinating. And I think also really speaks to what all three of you were sharing about, with that idea of this field expanding, and I think in ways that we wouldn't have even thought about a couple of years ago. And here's this whole now other avenue for scholarship that definitely was probably not on people's minds, in the 20th century early music revival. So that is really cool to learn about. I will add, my dad still has his original iPod, so it's, the one where you spin the little wheel in the middle. They're definitely still around. But thank you. And Eunice, I would love to hear a little bit about what some of your major goals are as the director of your program, and kind of where you see your program going in the next few years.
Well, the main thing for us is to, first of all, to make the students, or make the instrumentalists and singers love the music, love early music, and they're really into it, and to know it, because sometimes they get there, they have tried a bit, but they really don't know much about it, or they are not really in love with this music. So the first thing is that they have to know it, and they have to really be excited about it. I think that's very important for us. The other thing is we have to develop in two areas. One is working as an orchestra and a choir, which is not a huge orchestra, but to have students playing in ensemble, at large ensembles, and singing and doing large ensemble works. But I consider very important that they have very specific work on their instruments, on their voices, and work on chamber music, because working on chamber music is what it's going to bring them to the next level. Playing in orchestra all the time, it's very nice, but sometimes it's not really something that brings them to the next level. So we work on these two areas. We have a couple of programs of chamber music in the semester, with all of them playing in different ensembles, with challenge works where they have to work very hard to get them really well. And we have large projects where we have guests, conductors, guest artists that come and work specific music. We have semester-long projects. We focus, for example, on Italian music, on French music. Now we are doing, this semester, we're working on Hispanic music from Latin America and Spain, and so on and so forth. So I think next semester will be German music, for example. So I think it's the only way that they can really work on the repertoire, get to know it in a profound way. And the other areas that it's very important for us is making this music available and accessible for the public, not only for young students or young musicians, but young people in general, and all people and all kinds of people. That's something very important for us to have, to bring this music to the people. I think they like it, but sometimes they don't know it. So that's probably the main thing for our ensemble, to work in those areas.
Thank you. For Dana, I have another question. So this is again along the lines of that idea of the HP field growing significantly in recent years. And so if you're a student now and you wanted to study early music performance at a college or a university, especially in the US, but all over North America, you'd have a lot more choices than you might have 10, 15 years ago, or even from when IU's program was first established. So from a director's perspective, what steps do you think a director can take to help ensure that your program has longevity and stands out to students?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think that, again, the more buy-in you get from students even outside the department and just more throughout the school is always very important. It's a tricky thing. I mean, there is a little bit of an elephant in the room, in the sense that, you know, with numbers that have been sort of going down generally in a lot of places, that means that administrations are having to make some tough choices. And I think, as was pointed out earlier, you know, oftentimes something like HP can be especially vulnerable to those kinds of change. So what one has to do is just be able to adapt. And of course, every situation is its own sort of ecosystem, if you will. And HP is a little bit different. I mean, the thing to remember is it came along longer. The sort of generic conservatory setup has been around a long time, and it didn't really start coming around and becoming more mainstream, if you will, until it was clear that, you know, if you go back a few decades, the recording industry was re-recording everything that had always just, you know, been on modern instruments. So that was a big opportunity. And so I think deans at various schools felt, well, we've got to get our students in on that as well. And it really is pretty serious. I mean, I think we often forget that by the late 1980s, for example, major orchestras were not programming pieces like the Brandenburg concertos very often. That there was really a point when when Bach, for example, was not being program so much because when you tuned into classical radio and heard that repertory, more often than not, it was with period instruments. Now that's changed more because, acknowledged conductors like Suzuki or McGuigan or, the list of names there are invited to conduct the New York Philharmonic or the Chicago Symphony. There's a lot more openness to the whole thing. Another sort of variable here is that not every school has a historical performance degree program, right? Sometimes it's an area of focus where it might be part of musicology. I can think of a number of schools where that's the case. Sometimes it's considered sort of an area of specialism. So it kind of gets a little more difficult, especially in situations where you're only majoring in that area because it's going to be a smaller. It's going to take on the appearance of being smaller, even if there are a good number of students. Why? Because an HP department is a microcosm of the school in its own way, right? So you're offering the whole range of instruments. It has its own curriculum. It's not unlike jazz in that sense. So like one of the challenges we found early on, and we made a few curriculum shifts, is that by the time, say in a master's degree, a 2-year master's degree, by the time you've taken the required courses that the whole school has to take, you've taken your lessons, and you have to think in terms of credit hours here. I hate to mention that, but that's that thing we all deal with in some way or another. The amount of credit hours actually left over to pursue just HP type things is a very small portion of it. It's between a quarter and a third. So we had to make a few changes so it was possible to sort of shoehorn a bit more in. And the master's area is also, when do people start studying period instruments? Generally not as undergraduates. The largest number of students are in master's or doctoral programs. So people will come into a master's situation with a whole wide variety of backgrounds, some very little, some a lot. So it becomes a little bit of a challenge to make sure everybody's getting what they need during that very precious period of time. If it's a doctoral degree, you've got much more time. If it's an undergrad degree, you're ahead of the game. So it's complicated, and it sort of depends where you are and what your own interests and goals are, because every program's a little bit different and complements different types of people.
Wonderful, thank you. Karen, this next one is for you. And so specifically, you spoke to the fact that you've been doing a lot of work with Amherst, both at their summer festivals and some of their year-long offerings. I myself grew up going to the summer festival and found it a great place to, get to connect with other young people who did historical performance. And so when you're teaching at Amherst or facilitating classes there, how do you navigate teaching a group that could range from amateurs all the way to pre-professionals? And this is also something that might happen on a smaller level within university departments. You might kind of have those same levels of ability or interest.
Sure. When I'm teaching at Amherst, most of the time I'm doing notation classes. So I teach early notation, and those classes tend to be mostly populated by enthusiastic hobbyists and amateurs, not so much the pre-professionals. I have done a couple of classes here and there for pre-professional student groups at Amherst that are like connected with a specific project. Like one summer we did the Roman de Fauvel, and we had a group of pre-professional musicians that were enrolled in a particular program, but I did a specific one-off notation class targeting that era for them, and that went really well. So I guess it's a little hard to answer the question just because the classes don't tend to be so holistic. in terms of population. They tend to be a little bit more separated out a little bit. I have to say, though, that I have the best time teaching the hobbyist notation folks at Amherst. They're largely older folks that kind of fell into playing recorder and learning to read from facsimile at some point over the years, and their level of knowledge rivals that of my academic peers that are specialists in the field. They're just a fantastic group, so I hesitate to even call them amateurs in that regard. I feel like some of them are just as well versed in the intricacies of, you know, Renaissance notation as the scholars out there writing on the topic. But, you know, every once in a while you do get a class that's a bit of a mix. And it's really just about finding a way of engaging everybody with the material. The Amherst classes are short, so you really only have 5 days to do this. It would be different if it were an entire semester long, for example, I think. But for 5 days, you can find ways of getting folks enthusiastic about something in the material. And, you know, they're choosing to be there because they want to learn that particular repertory or that particular skill or something about that particular manuscript or era or notational device. And so the self-motivation is already strong, if that makes sense.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that is such a good point, that a really big part of the field does come from, you know, amateur musicians or people who were trained in, you know, in the classical field or pop or modern or jazz, and then have found their way into early music, and just, I agree, bring such a wealth of enthusiasm and knowledge, and it's just really exciting to get to, you know, to have all of these people coming into this field from all these different places. And that's something that I always loved getting to experience at Amherst, and then to a smaller degree within my university historical performance program. So thank you. It's great to hear about that. Another question for Eunice. So you mentioned having studied both in Mexico and the United States. Would you speak a little bit about the kind of the differences and similarities between the music education systems in each country, and maybe what you think each could offer the other?
Well, I think education in both places are great, but they are very different. I really loved when I was in the States, because you have great flexibility on choosing what you want to do, and the classes you want to take, and the opportunities you have to make your own curriculum. I mean, I was there for doing masters, so I don't really know, I didn't really live the bachelor's experience, but from the master's point of view, I think it's a very enriching experience, because you get to choose from your field many options, and you get to work with specialists in the field that have they're very knowledgeable and make you really know different things that you never knew about it, and make you make your way into what you want for your future. And I think that's very important, and really makes you think differently. Here in Mexico, we have also great classes and great teachers, but the curriculum is much more very well structured. It has a very, I don't want to say it rigid, but it's not flexible. So you have to learn what you have to learn, and that's it. Especially in the bachelor's field. In the master's degree, it's a little bit more flexible, but you don't have that many options. Just what Dana was saying, you don't have that. You don't have the opportunity, because you have to learn many things, and you have these credits, that you have to earn in your master's or bachelor, so that could be complicated. I think the Mexican curriculum must be really flexible. We have to work in that area. The University of I'm speaking basically about the University University of Mexico, because we have all different schools. We have Escuela Superior de Música, we have the conservatory, we have other schools. I'm not talking about them because I don't know them. Well, I do know them, but not really well. I didn't study there, but I know that they also not very flexible. So I think you have to work in that area. It's very complicated in the university because it's like a huge university with many areas. And if you want to make something flexible, you have to wait for years for it to happen. So we're working on that, and hopefully it will happen. On the other hand, I think the American curriculum is very interesting, but sometimes it needs to have a little more structure in the way that I noticed when I studied there, that I learned subjects like music history or music theory in a more profound way than it's taught in the United States. It was a very strange thing because you have to pass these exams at the beginning, and I thought I really didn't know anything about anything. That was what I thought. But then I read, the syllabus and things, and I took the examinations, and finally I passed them all. And I thought, well, maybe what I learned in Mexico, it's not that bad. Have this old structure and this sort of old school, it's not that bad. So maybe, if you can find a way to mix them all, will be good. But things have changed a lot. So now the students and the needs for the music field are very different from what they were 20 or 30 years ago. So the students need to learn about many things, and they have to be fluent or proficient in many areas, and they have to really invent themselves in this field so they can make a living, right? So I think both places have great things, and both places have things to grow on and to change.
Okay, so I would love to know, what is a piece of advice that you would share to either current HP students or maybe future HP students looking to get into the field? And as we've seen, we have people from all different areas of the early music field tonight, performance and more scholarly as well. So what's a piece of advice that you would share for a student looking to enter the field either today or in the future? Just help them along their way. And maybe while you're thinking, I can also share with anyone who's listening to this recording that if you have a question for any of our panelists, to feel free to email the EPLC email address, which is eplc@earlymusicamerica.org, and we'll be happy to forward that on to whichever panelist you're curious to hear about. And then panelists, if you have your piece of advice, feel free to just jump in and share whenever you're ready.
Okay, I'm happy to. I would say that, once you start in an institution of some sort going for a degree, your professional life has started. You are going to meet up with everybody again later when you're all out there having your careers. You will all bump into each other doing different things. Some of you will have changed course. Some will have focused in a different area and really run with it. So it comes back a little bit to we kind of need to show our best professionalism from day one, in a sense. And as we do work in things like chamber music and other areas, we're honing our collaborative skills. And I think that's just a really important thing to be thinking about. The other thing is, don't expect to have every dream come true tomorrow. It takes time. We have to remember about delayed gratification sometimes. If it's something you really, really want, you're willing to do what it takes to achieve that. You'll be willing to put up with a lot to do it too. I'm speaking for myself. I was kind of late in my interest to the whole thing. I started off. I started off as a treble boy singer at a choir school where that's what everybody did. Was just going to go into church music. Ended up in my 30s doing a PhD in musicology in the UK, lived in the UK 11 years, had a career as a singer, as a keyboard player. The thing is, do as much as you can and follow your nose, really, and stick with it. All of us go through periods of time that can be discouraging. And all of us get to moments where we might want to throw in the towel and say, well, maybe I just need to do something else. But you can still, if you stick with it, you keep holding the torch. It all comes back around. Definitely, that's what I would say.
Thank you, Dana. Eunice or Karen, if you'd like to share yours whenever you think of it.
I don't know. I think for me, any advice I would give is a lot more general, considering that I'm not within the performance circuit much myself. I guess what I would say is just keep an open mind about the kinds of music that might be out there to explore and to get into. There's so much more repertory and so many more people involved in music, historically speaking, than we really know, that we can possibly know. There's so much that hasn't been recorded yet. There's so many, things that haven't been transcribed yet. There's so many people that are really undersung, underrepresented, that it's a wonderful opportunity to sort of break new ground, think a little bit outside the box. And of course, also think about the ways in which this music could be constructed historically, but also creatively in terms of, what performance opportunities you might have. There's the traditional concert circuit, but there's early music groups that are now recording soundtracks for films and video games. And that's something to be aware of as a possibility. And so don't discount all the different avenues that your work and your interests could take you.
Well, I agree with everything both Dana and Karen just said. It's great advice. It's raining here. And the only thing I probably would say is that follow your curiosity and to never lose it. Because it's the only way you can find new repertoire that's there, but you don't know it. And be professional and work very, very hard in everything you do. You do it as a professional, and I think things start to happen. And there's always something for you to do. You have to find your way. And sometimes it's very hard for a young professional or for a student in this field. Because it's sometimes different from what you're used to doing or what you learned when you were young. So keep doing it, and you will find something where you can really bloom and find your way in this music world. I think it's wonderful. So that's it.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of our panelists, to Dana and Eunice and Karen, and to Early Music America for helping us to host this, and all of the members of the EPLC for helping get this off the ground. I think it's been a great conversation. I've learned a lot tonight, and hoping to see everybody at our next mixer, which is the last Sunday of each month. So I believe it's April 30th, end of next month. And thank you so much for joining us tonight.